in terms of
In terms
character,
of
I
character, I
want to
want to
understand,
understand.
for each character you have that entire backstory planned out, or as much as possible, or are you more method you have a real clear structure for every character? Do you have that in place, or is it more organic?
See, it depends on how important the character is, right?
Yeah.
If the character is not playing a major role, then to some extent you can get away with some degree of stereotyping or having a working knowledge of who this person is. But if it's a key character, then you need to know a lot more about them. Hold on. So, Olive, come and say hi to people, and then, yes, my babu. Okay. Okay, go. That was Olive. Every writer should get a cat. I strongly recommend it. So if your character is one of the key characters, if it's the protagonist or the antagonist or stuff like that, then you need to know as much about them as possible. But there is a very interesting document that people can find on the web. It's a screenplay checklist written by someone who was a reader for a Hollywood studio. It's a writer called Terry Rossio. Okay, Terryrossio, Terry Rossio. And he was a reader. That means he used to evaluate scripts for a Hollywood studio. And he's written a blog called Death to Writers, right? Death to Writers. I think it's on a blog site called WordPress. People should be able to find it quite easily. And he gives us really, really interesting checklists for screenplay. And I found it an invaluable tool. People should just look for it and download it. And one of the most important things that I learned from that checklist is characters can often be defined in terms of their greatest fear. And that really, a lot of my approaching characters comes from that advice. To really understand the core of a character, don't try and identify what he or she wants most or loves most. You have to find out what is the deepest fear, what is the unthinkable, what is the core of that character in terms of the negative, right? And that will give you the clearest vision of the character. So a character to whom violence is unthinkable is much more important to understand Jay than any other thing that you can, than saying that he loves his mother or that he is a feminist. None of that will give you a clearer insight into Jay from Jane Tu Ya Jane Na than realizing that his deepest fear is the fact that he will be violent and therefore a regressive male like his mother has taught him to fear, right? And very often you will realize that your climax is, or your resolution, or the point where your character reaches his or her transformation is when you are able to resolve them with this fear of theirs. So all the greatest characters that you think of, so even in the best films that you love, all the films that you love, you look at characters that have stayed with you for a long time and you spend a little time and you realize that one of the things you're always able to understand about them is what is their biggest fear or their unthinkable according to them, right? So for example, if you look at Gabbar from Sholay, if you think about it, what does Gabbar really want? Money? For what? Beyond the point, what is he going to do with money? He's living off sackfuls of wheat that the villagers give. With all the money and that he has as a dacoit, he can't even build a hut for himself. He's sleeping on boulders. What does he want? Does he want fame? No, that's one part of it. That's one conversation where he says, how much is the reward on me? So what is the unthinkable? The unthinkable to him is lack of freedom. Okay, and that is what he never forgave Thakur for, the fact that he was jailed. That is the unthinkable to him, and that drives him. And that is, then you realize, oh, that's why he lives on boulders. That's why he lives in freedom. That's why he does what he wants to do. To him, the right to do exactly what he chooses comes from the unthinkable, which is anybody taking away his freedom. Okay? Right. To Thakur, what is the greatest fear? You start thinking about it. Okay? And initially you meet a man who, to him, there is no real unthinkable, but it is when he loses his family that the idea that he will not be able to avenge what was done to them is the unthinkable. The fact that he probably wakes up with sweat in the middle of the night, remembering how his family was killed, that is what drives him, not the urge to do justice. but that urge to overcome that demon. So you find your character's demon. And this is not just true for action drama, for action or for drama or for thrillers. You will also find it true for comedy. So
Right.
Munna, if you really want to understand him, you will have to understand his biggest fear is his fear of disappointing his father, of breaking his father's heart. That is what will help you understand Munna much more than the fact that he's a tapori or that he's a goon or that he, has this, rough and rowdy way or enjoys his humor or loves his people or none of that will help you understand him better than at heart he's still that boy who's terrified of disappointing his father. So not just in drama, even in comedy, even in romance, you find the unthinkable. Is it loneliness? Is it the fear of poverty? Is it the loss of freedom? What is the core negative or the core fear of your character? You find that, and you will have a character who's living, breathing, and jumping off the pages. And when it's performed well, it will be jumping off the screen.
Right, right. Now, in terms of two characters who are drastically different and you're writing dialogues for them, it's simpler because the characters themselves are chalk and cheese, right? But if there are two characters or two friends who are somewhat similar in character, has it ever happened to you that when you're writing dialogues, uh, you you cannot really make out for whom it is? Like there is a possibility that those dialogues could have been interchanged and that distinction is not coming through. Have you ever faced that while you're writing dialogues for
I'm sure I
characters?
have. That's a bad dialogue writing day. I'm sure people will find that in some of my work. Uh, that is either when you're not inspired enough by the subject or not inspired enough by the characters, or you're working to somebody else's script and not really got into it. Sadly enough, I think the film that I feel most um, um, awkward about as a dialogue writer was a film called Bang Bang, which is a huge hit, and Ritik looked like $1 million, and Katrina looked absolutely beautiful, and stuff like that. And the action was great, but I think my dialogues were highly average at best, and that's because I really couldn't lock into the characters. And it's one of the few times I did a film where I was not totally convinced or did not completely see the characters, right? But otherwise, that's the difference between good dialogue writing or good writing and lazy writing or less than compelling writing. I won't say bad writing, all writers try to do a good job, but that's when it's less compelling. The whole point is you don't decide how characters talk. The point, the journey of a writer is to get to a point where you are listening. If you created living, breathing characters, if you really gotten to know them well, then it's not a question of deciding how they talk. It's a question of listening to how they talk and just putting it down on paper. You are a medium between those characters that actually exist out there and the audience. So if you are
Right.
deciding how people talk, you've already missed the boat. You should be listening to how your characters talk and putting it down.